Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is, we'll move as quickly as we can through this work session, but it is a dense update, a lot of very important topics, so we can go as fast as slow as we need to. But we have a number of speakers, so we'll make those changes quickly. But again, everything in here is really relevant to where we are in our cycle, and we've tried to consolidate it as much as we can into one presentation. So with that, we'll jump right in. First topic for you this afternoon is really about FY21 year end, and we've got this position on your agenda to follow Mr. Churchman and Ms. Arrington. We do have audited financials, so we can, as we always do, every year we bring that as a companion item to the audit because we know where our year-end position is, and the first conversation that usually ensues is what do we do with positive results of operations? First and foremost, Chesterfield County, we always have positive results of operations. We do not come up here and ask for supplemental appropriation. It's somewhere in the charter. I'm sure Jeff could point it out to you, but that's our approach. So this first slide and the next few topics really kind of get into where did we land and what are we proposing to do with them. That being said, we are not asking you to take action on this plan this afternoon. There's a consent item for you this evening that would set a public hearing for December so that there's plenty of time for public discourse on these topics. That's typically the way that we try to do it. We've already had this conversation at Audited Finance, just like you heard Mr. Churchman talk about on the year-end item. So that's just a quick note on process. So all in all, this first slide is really looking at the general government year-end. So after you close the books, excess revenues or expenditure appropriation that you did not use, what is the sum total of that? For us here, it's about $105 million. That is a large number. There's no question about it. So the first question begs is, well, how did we end up in this position? First and foremost, it's no secret. We've been up here talking, myself and Mr. Durkin have been talking through this issue for over a year. Really, this is about the time last year where we really got a sense that our COVID footing was underneath us, and we brought for you a revised budget. As you remember, we had an original budget. We pivoted quickly to a worst-case COVID budget. We came back in December and said, okay, we think things are solid enough that we can spend a portion of this money, and the board's priority was the public safety pay plan by and large. At that time, we also disclosed that we felt like because of some of these unique COVID phenomenon that we were going to have considerably more funding than we were asking you to spend at that time, but we weren't going to ask you to spend it because we still didn't know, we'd never seen a pandemic, we can't model it, we don't know where we're going to go, but we felt secure enough in spending a portion of it. So we've been very clear and forthcoming with that concept that we would be standing here today with, not that we ever said, $100 million or whatever the number might be, but that it's going to be a substantially different year than what we normally see from a percentage perspective. Where does this funds come from? It's primarily on the revenue side and coming from phenomena like the sales tax issue. We've talked about this everywhere that we've had audience. Basically, that one of the sort of odd outcomes of COVID, people stayed at home, worked from home, and kept those dollars closer to home. So our sales tax number, just as one example or one contribution to this bottom line, $22 million of it just comes from sales tax above and beyond what we had budgeted. Some of that is due to budgeting it low because not knowing what consumer spending was going to bring us. The job market certainly fell apart pretty quickly, but it came back together, and we had our best year ever in terms of consumer spending. We never would responsibly stood up here and advocated for that. Then you've also got some, as we'll talk about in just a second, some timing issues, particularly on the land purchases. The five of you had approved the purchase of the former Southside Speedway property, Spring Rock Green, and Adeline Acres, which will give us at some point our waterfront access in the Bermuda District. Those had all been approved in the prior fiscal year, but if anybody that's been through a real estate transaction knows, sometimes the closings don't align with the fiscal year. So those transactions approved in the fiscal year just rolled over, the funding rolled over, and so we are just spending what we thought was going to be, prior year dollars in 22. So that's you'll see that as we go through the list. But those two factors alone contribute for more than half of this sum total. So With that being said, I'm happy to take any other questions on it. We've got a breakdown of all the factors that go into it. But I think the larger question for today, and the larger question for the public as we look forward to December, is how are we recommending to spend these dollars? Invest these dollars in many instances, and I do emphasize the word invest. The largest ticket item on here you see at the top is the school SRP contribution. We've been discussing this for months. You all, in fact, called a special board meeting at CTC Hall to discuss this concept, and that $27 million goes to fully fund the school SRP program, which was in the teens not that long ago, has come all the way to 100% funded. It frees up $12 million on a recurring basis, so the payback on this is very, very quick. The first immediate payback, tangible payback of that, is allowing us to move forward on Tomahawk Creek Middle and Fallen Creek Middle. It comes from this concept, and again, we've been discussing this publicly, committees, special meetings today, you name it, for several months. The land acquisitions I just went through, approved in a prior meeting, closings didn't occur, it rolls over to the next year. That's not really a, the budget was better than we thought. That's simply just a timing concept. And the projects are listed out there. Cash funding of the, yes, sir, you have a question?
I just want to clarify, when you say Tomahawk Middle, it's actually a new middle school.
It's a reliever.
Not-
Yeah. Western 360, yes, sir. Yeah.
Someone at home who may be first tuning in may not understand that distinction, and they might go, well, what are they doing in Tomahawk? So it's important for everybody to know that we're building another one.
Yeah, yes, sir, absolutely. That's a very good point. Third item on the list, cash funding of FY22 CIP. You all have approved, as last April, a CIP for this particular year, our capital projects, as we've done every single year. And what staff is coming back to you saying, with these kind of year-end results, why would we go out and put that on the charge card, if you will, as opposed to paying it in cash, avoiding all of the interest costs that are associated with that, and adding projects to our referendum lineup that you'll get a little preview of here this afternoon. But as we get into January and February, that's additional capacity that we are able to tack on to the referendum. That freeing up $2 million plus a year, particularly in the early years, by cash funding the CIP. And that's doing things, it was really sort of a cleanup concept from the last several years. As we head into referendum, everything is funded and taken care of. Items like the Matoaka Fire Station, the Beulah, the rehabilitation of Old Beulah Elementary School to have Parks and Rec and the recreational facilities outside there, about $8 or $9 million of transportation funding just to kind of fill in a few projects. So again, that was the concept. Before we go out and ask the public for a new tranche of debt, let's make sure everything that we had previously approved is funded and taken care of. That's an important concept. The CCPS, Future Priority Reserves, this is, again, one of the COVID phenomenon. We had a CARES Act plan that we stood at this podium, everyone agreed to. The governor came in at the very last second, just literally a few days before Christmas, and made another investment, if you will, in the schools portion of CARES. But the way that was done was on a per capita basis. We could not then spend all of the money we had intended to spend on the school division because the state came in and overrode us. So we were able to very quickly pivot those dollars into some reimbursables, knowing at the time that this 10.9 would essentially fall out of the bottom a year later, but that we would reserve it for some future school use. Again, that's a planned thing. Everything that we've touched on now is nothing new. These are just, well, maybe a little bit different way of handling these, but we're reducing liabilities and we are freeing up ongoing operating capacity to deal with other priorities that you or the community might have. Public Safety Compensation Reserve falls into that same category. When you authorized the pay plan a year ago, all 5 of you looked at us and said, we want to make sure we can keep this going on an ongoing basis. And so we actually adopted a policy that said money that's saved in public safety categories should be set aside to ensure that we can make those step increases in future years so that we aren't setting up a big promise and then we can't follow through. This is just staff being in compliance with that policy that we established last year. And then lastly, speaking of policies, our fund balance policy. This is our unassigned portions. These are dollars that have no other call on them other than this is our pure rainy day fund. This is what keeps us in the AAA category, and this is just allowing us to maintain compliance with that policy at $1.7 million. So 100 million sounds like a big number, but when you start to divide it up and you look at 86, 87 million, effectively 87% of it is really going to pre-existing things that we knew about, and have been planning for. There really is not a whole lot new here today. The items below it, a little bit more nuanced. So let's walk through those, but dollar-wise, much, much smaller. County SRP contribution, both programs are closed to new entrants, county and schools. We've got schools at 100%. This would allow us to take the county program, as we understand it today, to 100%, which accounts for the installation of the public safety pay plan that caused a little bit of erosion in our funded status because they were not expecting to see those increases for the employees. So we've been able to address that and get this to 100% funded status, or at least that's our belief standing here today. That's $1 million plus, give or minus, operating capacity that we were able to reinvest into the operation every single year. The turfing of high school fields, I'm going to leave that to Mr. Smet. He's going to be with you in just a second. There's been a lot of questions on that. He's got some good information. This item was also discussed in liaison. Community revitalization. All 5 of you have told us this is a growing priority for the board. Sidewalks, street lights, our older neighborhoods. How do we go in here and make investments? $3 million is not going to begin to tackle that full list that has been amassed, but it is a nice start. So that's where those funds would go. Capital project supplement. You can't pick up a newspaper or turn on the news and hear about inflation across the board. This just addresses a few inflationary items we have in some of our projects, particularly the fleet facility that we have here on campus that's going to provide a lot of efficiencies. Good project, approved project, needs a little bit more money to make sure that it stays in the black. Mobile Command Center, this is that, exactly what it is that allows police and fire to go out to a scene. We hope we don't have to use it, but unfortunately we do from time to time. The existing unit is older. This would reinvest in this. This is a perfect opportunity to invest one-time monies. We're only buying this every 10 or 15 years. Municipal solid waste containers. Audited Finance in particular has been really pushing staff to look for lease opportunities where we can convert those to an own. So when you go to a convenience center, the big containers that you put your materials into are leased, and this would convert those to an own facility. Again, freeing up operational dollars on an ongoing basis. And then finally, fleet fund supplement. So that's an internal service fund, operates as a business within county government. And we did not pay all of the monies, essentially, that we owed the business during COVID as a way to forestall some other more painful cuts. And so this just basically makes that payment in lump as opposed to doing it part of the 21 budget. So just making sure that we keep the integrity of that fund for the future year. So that's a lot of information. It's a dense slide, but again, it's a very important topic. Are there any questions before I go to the next one?
No, just a comment, Mr. Harris, and that is, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the school SRP topic has been a topic for a very long time, and I do think, when you look at these allocation considerations and plan allocations, that it's just nice that that will not be a topic for the foreseeable future as long as our committee continues to operate under the controls that were set forth a few years ago. So I do consider that to be a very, very good use of one-time monies to eliminate liabilities, and would hope that our citizens feel the same way, because in addition to that, we're also keeping our promises to teachers that have been here in the county teaching for many, many years. So just want to say thank you for your management and also our budget department's management of this issue for the last 5 years. I think it's a job well done.
And I think, as Mr. Ingles pointed out in some of our other briefings, we've got this $10.9 million for future school priorities. We can set that aside. That will stay in the general fund balance. So if there is slippage within the SRP, and that happens, there's rate investment assumptions, all kinds of things, actions that none of you would have anything to do with, that could see that funded status slip a bit. But we know that we've got some funds to fall back on if we were to find ourselves in that position. So I think that's really important. It's at 100% today, but we've also got a contingency plan if something, were to happen.
Mr. Chairman? Yes. And the other thing that's important about that, and Chris, you made a good point, is that by freeing up that SRP, it allows for that $12 million in budgetary money now be used to actually fund the debt for 2 new schools, which actually moves those schools up by approximately 2 years. As we know in the county right now, Falling Creek is in dire need of replacement, and it's too small to handle the capacity. Tomahawk's overcrowded, and so adding a new middle school in the western part of the county will help relieve that, and the quicker we can get that done. So, yes, it's a great one-time money use, but also because it frees up that capacity. And, we also know that, depending on, certainly on what the costs and things are, we're looking at what the cost would be for those 2 schools. But, having some reserve funds, we may need those to actually help pay for those 2 schools.
Absolutely. That's a great segue to slide 2. But Mr. Carroll, you're right. Anytime you can take one-time monies and spend them on a one-time purpose, that then also spins out recurring savings and recurring capacities. I mean, you can't do better than that. So it's a good day. So on the school side, just like we did Gerard side, slide 2 looks at the school piece. School board has taken action on this. These are their recommendations, as they do every year, that come over to you. This also subject to a public hearing that we would have in December, so no action on this tonight. And it really falls into 2 main buckets. The first one you see there, $20 million reserve for future compensation. They set up a pay plan for teachers, just like we done public safety. They would like to have some ability to make sure they could keep that going in a lean year, as well as to draw on this as a one-time source. We've got the general purpose, if you will, compensation study out there now, and then they've got some other enhancements that they would like to potentially consider for teachers. This gives them a nice place to fall back on for either one of those purposes moving forward. The rest of these items, I won't go through and read them all for you, except for to point out the Falling Creek Middle School construction cost is exactly what Mr. Carroll, kind of what you were talking about. We haven't put those projects out for bid. This would allow us a little bit of cushion with the current bid market for those kind of facilities. And the rest of them is really continuation of superintendent-driven priorities that they've had over the last several years for things like safety and major maintenance and those types of items. They've been doing it on an iterative basis, making sure that they can sort of complete what they've done in the previous year and then come back for future items. And you see a lot of examples: cameras, playground refresh. That last year, collectively, the 10 of you made the largest investment in major maintenance in the county's history, and this is really just following up on that momentum. They're listed out here in pretty discrete detail. I'm happy to take any questions, but again, this would be on your December agenda for action.
Any questions, board members, or comments?
All right.
Thank you.
So my last slide for this afternoon, I think, is really important bookend to what we just discussed. Okay, so let's talk about the real estate update in the county. And the reason that's here is because we're getting ready to flip to a new calendar year. This is where we throw fiscal year out the window. Our revaluation calendar is based on the actual calendar year. It's not tied to the fiscal year. And tied up in that, the most important piece of that is setting your real estate rate for the upcoming 22 tax year. So that's a decision point that looms for you very soon. I think staff is taking the position that you should take action or potentially take action in December as opposed to January. So here's what we know now. I don't have all the final book. It hasn't been done. That staff is still working very hard under Mr. Bloomfield's leadership. But what you see here in the chart is median sales price of single-family homes in the county. The dotted line is a year ago. The solid line is the activity that we're seeing right now. And all you need to pay attention to is the spread between the two lines as we move further down the calendar there. So you see the tremendous spread in the last year, if you will. I think everybody understands intuitively, talking to a neighbor, reading a newspaper article, that the real estate market in Chesterfield and really nationally has been very hot. I think preferences for housing have changed, and it's caused sort of a fundamental difference in what people are willing to pay for housing. So we are expecting, and you've seen the city of Richmond go through this process sooner. We saw a revaluation in all those instances be pretty healthy. We're normally, you see here that on the bottom right-hand corner, we're typically in the 3 to 4% reval window. We could see that as high this year, preliminary estimates anywhere from 7 to 10% in terms of residential reval for existing homes. So we will dial that in. We're doing so now. By the time we stand up in December, we'll have a better handle on that. But I think what we all understand, given that expectation, is that we cannot maintain or we cannot pass through a tax levy that's 10% higher than it was a year earlier. So we put this in here really as a preview item and a companion item to what I just discussed. We know that real estate conditions have come in already better than we expected, and that the next tax year is going to be a strong one. So we need to find some ways to mitigate that. So in December, staff's recommendation is that you set your max tax rate. Again, now this is an important distinction. If you were to set it hypothetically it's at 95 now. If you set it at 94, you cannot exceed 94. So you can't go back to 95. You could, in the example, go to 93. It's just, again, a hypothetical example. But I think staff's perspective is it sends a positive message by A, acting early, and B, bringing that max tax rate down at least some level, that we let the community know that, hey, we understand that the revals, when you get them in January, you walk out to the mailbox and you open that letter and your home value has gone up considerably, we understand that we need to react to that. So you can do that in December by lowering that max advertisement rate, sort of send that signal, but it's all about finding that balance and walking that fine line so that we don't send to the, the other constituents that you might have in the community that say you need to spend more in X, Y, or Z. You can still have a healthy debate about how to invest dollars. I'm not standing up here tonight, this afternoon, to tell you how to set that, at what level, but that it's taking a December action to lower that rate via the max rate, I think is a smart move, but not taking it all the way to the bottom. If it was a 10% reval, you wouldn't take it down 5 pennies, because you still want to have a healthy budget process, and then all of the process therefore forward is really an if/or. You can do this to the rate, or you can invest it in these ways. And that way it just allows for a much more transparent and healthy community conversation. So with there, I'll pause and see if there's any questions you might have.
Mr. Chair.
Questions, comments? I imagine this will get some discussion.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could just comment on this, besides the fact that I think it's absolutely important that we are communicating with the folks, with our citizens, to let them know that we absolutely have our eye on this ball and that we are taking all these issues into consideration. I think that we can't let this stand alone, that folks need to recognize that when you see this trajectory that is continuing to happen, and you put that into conversation with all of the other information that we have learned about what the housing market is, and the fact that as we've continued to hear across the board about the shortage in lots and the shortage in availability, that is a lot of what's behind driving this residential market. And so those issues, we cannot look at those issues in isolation as a board. We have to look at that and, the totality of understanding that, we are trying to absolutely maximize and allow our folks to maximize the value of their homes and their properties, but also provide opportunities, provide a marketplace with product, and continue to then balance that with what the real estate rate is. And so not any one of those issues exists in isolation. And I think that, it's important that the conversation, be inclusive of all of that, because I know when we start looking at some of these zoning projects, it brings some anxiety to some of our residents, but we hear also the affordable the affordable housing conversation, and all of that resounds in one bucket of conversation. So I think it's really important that folks understand we are definitely looking at this, we are definitely mindful, and want to make sure that, we are responsive in the correct ways. But I also think these conversations are so inclusive of so many factors, and we have to be really candid so that the community understands all of those factors are become part of one conversation many times.
Thank you. Mr. Wenzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. Mr. Harris, when will we have the final revaluation numbers?
You won't get the final numbers are not set until January 1st, effectively. Okay. But we will have, and typically do, between the time period of post-Thanksgiving to early December, a very solid preliminary estimate, enough to guide you all through this action in December.
Thank you. I mean, I certainly, in Clover Hill, have heard some folks interested in tax relief over the last year. We've had a couple of years, I think, of pretty solid revaluations, as that chart shows. And throughout those years, it does seem that the folks who are at the top of those revaluation lists, you know, at 10, 11, 12%, are a lot of my starter homes in Clover Hill. And so it does strike me as something we really strongly need to consider. The other thing I would say about this chart is that this, I think, gives us some confidence that people want to come to Chesterfield, that Chesterfield is operating well. You know, people vote with their feet. We have a great school system, we have a safe county, and we have things to do on the weekends here, and that part's growing. So I really look at this as a stamp of approval in some ways, that the demand in our county is this high, and would also adopt, in part, Ms. Haley's comments regarding housing. I mean, we have challenges there, and so for people who want to come here, we do need to have those discussions with our regional partners and internally as we consider our own zoning cases. So I thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Smet, who's going to walk you through in detail the turf field issue. Then Ms. Spillman will be before you with an update on your Stratus project, and we'll finish up quickly with Mr. Durkin on a few other miscellaneous financial topics.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Holland, members of the board, Dr. Casey. All right. Then down we are. Perfect. Thank you. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you know, the replacement of the turf. It's gotten a lot of attention. You know, folks have different opinions on there, but from a Parks and Recreation perspective, we feel like it, you know, brings a tremendous amount of value. So scope and cost, on average, we expect the fields to cost about $2 million apiece to convert from grass to turf. It's not as simple as just really killing the grass and laying down. You have to put in, you know, the drainage, everything underneath. You never know what you're going to dig into once you start to open up these turf fields. But on average, we're hoping we're going to land about $2 million per site. Now, you'll see the schedule on there. Ideally, we're going to present the information today. If you all decide to move forward at the December meeting, that would enable us to have 2 fields ready for play in the fall of 2022. So our initial sites, Bird and Monacan. Monacan has a nice stand of grass, but they have some issues with subsurface drainage there, so that was identified as probably the priority site there. So the key for us, why would we make such an investment in these fields? The biggest factor is field
Mr. Smet.
availability. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, can I interrupt for a second?
Please.
So I think before we even get into that, if I can ask one question that maybe you can help clarify for citizens. I think that citizens are confused about who and why and how this decision gets made, meaning whether it be Board of Supervisors or school board, and who. So if you could just give us some history as to how those fields are maintained, who puts the fields in, all those kinds of things, just as some background so that citizens understand that why it's before the Board of Supervisors and why the decision is ours to make.
Absolutely, Ms. Haley.
Thank you. And maybe I jumped ahead and maybe you were getting there, but I just
No.
thought it would be a good preemptive start.
Yeah, we'll get us all to a common base of understanding. So the high school varsity fields, they are installed, maintained by the schools. At this point, Parks and Recreation does not use those fields. There's limited public use. And the fields are typically maintained by the varsity crew, booster clubs, whoever it may be, but it's school staff that maintain those varsity fields. So the spring of 2021, the Virginia High School League, they decided to cram all the sports into the spring season. And unfortunately, it was a wet winter, and all the fields were, you know, ankle deep in mud. You know, the fields were unplayable at each of the schools. So they came to us and asked, can we help make our spring sports season a success? Can we get some time at River City? And our recreational groups were generous. They adjusted their schedules, and we were able to fit in as many as we could at Stratton Park as well as River City Sportsplex and help save the spring sports season for the high schools. And I think that was really a kind of an eye-opener for them. They saw the availability of turf. Turf fields are available 99% of the time, whereas a grass field, you have about 50% usability. So that started the discussion there, and then the thought was, if we were going to spend this much money, why would the county not play a role and help fund these fields so the Parks and Recreation Department and the citizens could use those fields when they were not in use by the schools? So that is why it is in front of the board, because we want the Parks and Recreation Department and the citizens to have access to these fields, which historically, if it wasn't a varsity school activity, the gates were locked. And the intent now is that we would be able to schedule groups out there, whether it was a rental or one of our recreation leagues, or we have, the facility open perhaps for open play for citizens. So we felt that there was enough of a benefit to the community and the Parks and Recreation Department that the county should take a lead role in moving forward. Does that answer your question, Mrs. Haley? Absolutely. Very good. So I mentioned that the turf fields are available 99% of the time. Really, freezing precipitation is the only thing that will keep you from being able to play on them. Grass fields about 50% of the time. You're looking at rain, mud, turf maintenance. All these things limit use. So in reality, you would need to build 2 grass fields to get the amount of playing time, playing hours that you get from one turf field. So even once the grass field's established, you're looking at fertilization, mowing, soil conditioning, aerating. It's a very labor-intensive process to maintain a great stand of grass suitable for athletic competition. Turf fields, weekly grooming, infill replacement, about 10 years is what you can expect to get out of a turf field with proper maintenance. So if you look at the 25-year cost of installing and maintaining 2 grass fields versus 1 turf field to get that same amount of playing time, over that 25-year span, the turf field is actually less expensive because of the reduced maintenance and the fact that it would take 2 grass fields to provide the same number of playing hours. Now, one point I'd also like to make is that with redevelopment at these school sites, what that does, that takes advantage, the existing infrastructure is already there. We've got the parking lots, we have the access roads, we have the grandstands, we have the concession stands, the restrooms. If we were to have to go out and build these new fields, whether grass, even out in the community, you'd have to install all those amenities to serve the public and run water, run electricity. So allowing us to take advantage of what's at the high schools right now really reduces the overall scope and cost of providing these opportunities for the public. So one of the great things about turf fields, they look great all the time. It's a consistent appearance and condition. And really with a facility like this, it really aligns with the quality of the education that's provided by Chesterfield County Public Schools and the quality of life. We mentioned earlier that people are moving to Chesterfield. They want to be in Chesterfield County. So our athletic facilities at the high schools should mirror the same level of quality that we have within our parks, within our school system. School uses, the conversion supports all the current school uses. And as I mentioned earlier, part of the motivation behind this is that it adds community uses, and all of a sudden we can get recreational users, we can get walkers out there, we can get other groups that historically have not been able to use these facilities. So we've got a variety of user groups right now that use our turf fields at River City and at Stratton. These are just an example of the different sports: lacrosse, football, soccer. Football is seeing a huge surge at River City. But as we replace the fields out there, now, we're not putting in permanently sewn in lines for football. But on these high school fields, that may be another opportunity there to allow those user groups to really have a consistent playing surface that's available, most if not all of the year. So if we're going to invest this money, what is the return on the investment? So again, year-round use, that's our biggest piece. Predictable playing surface under all conditions. The weather no longer impacts playability. It really doesn't impact scheduling. It gives them a greater area for other school functions, whether it's PE or some other school function. Sports tourism is going to benefit. The hope is the shared use agreement would allow us to take advantage of these new fields and use them for our sports tourism efforts. These are nice stadium fields. With the exception of the old field at CTC Hull, the Parks and Recreation Department does not have stadium fields at this time in our mix. So this would allow those groups, those organizations that want to play on a stadium field to take advantage of the existing high school facilities. Now, as always, Parks and Recreation and Chesterfield County Public Schools work very closely together, and I am proud of the relationship we have with their staff. It's a very cooperative, supportive relationship. So prior to this point, we talked through a memorandum of understanding about who would care for the fields, who would maintain the fields, who would help shepherd construction. And Parks and Recreation is going to manage the procurement and the construction process for these fields just because of the experience we have at the other turf fields within the county. We've already been through the construction of these fields. So on the operations side, what do we get out of this? Again, it's the access. School use is the priority, as it should be. But then, the times that it's not in use, again, the citizens, the community. The other piece is, during the summer, our Bermuda grass rectangular fields, they're closed from June until August because we have to let the grass grow. And that's one of the disadvantages of the Bermuda grass field. This would allow us to fill that critical period when our Parks and Recreation facilities are closed. So from our perspective, it's a wise investment. We feel like it'll benefit the community as well as the Parks and Recreation Department. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And I have Mr. Connick with me if we have any technical questions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm just going to reiterate the comment that I made at the liaison committee prior to joining this board as serving as PTSO president at Midlothian High School. I was a huge advocate for adding lacrosse and the opportunity of lacrosse at all of our high schools. And while there was a lot of community support, the biggest concern and pushback that we got from the athletic directors was scheduling and having fields to schedule, because putting lacrosse players / football players on the same field, was dangerous at best because of the use of the field and the way it tore up the field. And certainly, if we then wanted to let our girls, and I'm looking at Mr. Winslow, who has the up and coming, the time my daughter was playing field hockey, on that same field, it was a no-go, because they were creating divots in the field, and then that made it dangerous for the other folks. And so to recognize, especially in light of what we've learned in these last 20 months, about the importance of whatever extracurricular activity we can afford our youth for mental health issues, for healthy benefits, to allow families to allow their kids to re-engage in things. There are so many behind-the-scenes issues that you cannot capture in a dollar value that I think the message we're sending is so much broader than just this is a field. It's really an investment in our entire community. And one of the things that I like about our Parks and Rec department that aligns with our libraries is that every one of our citizens, from a infant child to our senior citizens, can use these amenities, and it benefits everybody across the spectrum. So I think this, kudos to our folks for looking at this and looking into it in depth and recognizing that these are two fields we have an opportunity to test out, to see how this works, to ensure that the implementation happens in a timely fashion, so we don't hold up our sports programs, that we have availability and more availability for our seniors. I mean, you know, and then we kind of go from there and see how it works. But thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Chairman. Yep. Question, are we going to, is Parks and Rec going to be able to recoup any of its costs in terms of maintaining the field with some of the rental fees that can go along with some of the groups that I know will, for instance, pay to be at River City for a slot here and there? Is there any sort of a recoupment opportunity there?
Yeah, that's really where we see a lot of the drivers, especially at River City, but, you know, any turf field that we have, there are a number of, whether it's a travel team or a AAU team, whatever it may be, that is where we have our biggest deficiency. You know, our recreation groups, our leagues, we assign them use of facilities through an activity period process. But really, the demand that we have for rectangular fields from these travel groups, from the independent teams, it outstrips our supply at this time. So we're really hoping that the addition of these high school fields will allow us to meet more of that need. And even if it frees up fields at River City, that increases the potential for rentals to bring in more sports tourism events. And yes, Mr. Winslow, that those costs, that revenue we generate would help offset our expenses.
And if I could append to that, Mr. Winslow and Mr. Smet, you know, even last week, I was approached by one of the names that was on that one slide of an existing user that's under constraints and cannot grow its league, even though it has a waiting list. But it actually has formed teams that are Chesterfield-based families and children that they actually have told me that they have to travel to Henrico to play all of their games in that particular league. And they are looking forward to sitting down with Mr. Smet and his folks, which they've done before many other Chesterfield fields, and working out an arrangement for these two fields, if in fact it's approved.
I think that really underscores what Ms. Haley was talking about primarily, that is this notion of public utility and having access to the field 365 days a year. Obviously not during thunder and lightning storms. I don't want anybody saying Mr. Winslow said go play in the thunder and lightning, but you know, I know one other concern that's been brought up is safety, and I've tried to do a lot of research about the safety of turf fields in general, and it seems to come down to pounds per square inch of the little material that is dropped on the top, and making sure that that is always the coverage is correct at all times, and then also equipment. And so there's going to be, I think, if we decide to move forward with this as a pilot at Berta and Monacan, there's going to be an education that we'll need to have about making certain that everybody who uses those fields understands that there's certain equipment that's recommended for those fields, and to use that to help prevent injury. So I do think that's something, at least from my research, that we should keep in mind.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr.
absolutely.
Chairman.
And we have talked about that with schools, that we would help train their staff and work with them to make sure that everything's, you know, properly distributed, that the fields are maintained in accordance with their manufacturer's recommendations. And that gives you, again, the consistent playing surface, the safest possible field that you can have out there.
Excellent, excellent. Other questions, Christine?
I've learned way more about turf fields than, to be honest with you, that I've ever cared to learn about turf fields and grass fields, for that matter. I will say that going through the presentation from Mr. Connick, he seems to have the costs on the turf field side down pretty well. Seems to be pretty close in line on the maintenance of a grass field, but I'm not looking for it right this minute, but I like to get the breakdown of the estimated cost of $1 million to put the actual grass field in initially, because that seems significantly higher than what I'm finding in the research. The other three areas seem to be right on time, so I'm trying to figure out where my disconnect is. So
Okay.
if I can get that. And I've spent time on fields at Thomas Dale, at LC Bird. I will tell you, Dale's field is in really good shape. Bird's isn't. No question. That's a true statement. I've been on the fields with athletic directors, with people that prefer grass fields within the school system, with community businesses that take care of some of those fields. and just trying to understand both sides of this. And to be honest with you, at this point, I have not come to a conclusion. And I still have more homework to do, but I'm definitely much more educated than I was. I do think that the presentation that we were given at the school liaison meeting that said that the studies that we have so far on safety were inconclusive, and I don't think that we should make a decision with inconclusive data. I think we need to really focus on verifying that they are safe, or if they're not, why not, and what would have to be done to make them safe. As I look through, I've gone out and looked at as much as what does the NFL do, and 17 of their fields are grass and 14 are artificial turf. So they pretty much haven't made a decision either, but I am aware that the players' union has had some concern about playing on the turf. So I just want to understand all aspects of it. And again, I have not made up my mind at all. I'm just trying to understand it because there has been so much passion, quite frankly, on both sides of the issue, and I want to make sure we get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get you that information.
Mr. Chair?
Very good. Ms. Carroll.
I can't imagine that we're the first community in the country that is actually considering putting these type of fields in their high schools. So, and I think, right, Henrico has them. So one of the things that I think would be important for us to do as an organization is to communicate with these other organizations and communities and find out how successful they've been for those schools, what their maintenance has been like, whether or not, what type of materials, because again, in doing research like my colleagues, there are some older technologies such as tire crumb that's been used and is no longer used actually in making these fields. Now I believe they use cork. So I think it's important for the community to know what type of materials are going to be utilized in construction of the fields. I think it's important to look at injury statistics. You know, for example, some studies that I've read said that the incidence of concussion are a lot lower on the turf fields than they are on actual ground or grass. But then the injuries to ankles, knees are higher in some cases. So it depends on what study you look at. And the other thing is, as you've said, we have a pretty robust sports tourism. And the turf fields that we currently have at River City Sports Complex are being used every weekend, just about. And people are coming here from all over the country to utilize them. And I think it's important to get their perspective as to, number one, how they feel about utilizing those fields. And from those leagues that are coming here, what drives them to come here? Is it, in fact, the turf fields that are bringing them here? And I think that's some information that's important for the community to have. And then the other thing is, like you said, we have some local leagues. One, for example, is the Chesterfield Quarterback League. They utilize most of our county park facilities, which are not nearly, when you talk about grandstands and things like that, they're not nearly as fancy, so to speak, as our high school facilities. And it would be nice for those organizations when they do their championships at the end of their leagues to be able to bring it to a really great facility at one of our schools. Because it is a premier event for them, and I haven't made my mind up either. I want some more information on especially on the injury statistics, because there's some who are saying that these are more dangerous to play on. Some reports show that during the summer months that the fields are actually hotter and retain heat more so than regular grass, which would require us to, for kids who are practicing on the fields to actually have more breaks and maybe even some additional equipment for cooling down. So I just want to make sure we have all of the right information and that we can provide all of that information to the community so that we can make the best decision we can. I do think there are a lot of benefits to this, but we also need to make sure that when we move forward, that we're putting our best decision based on all of the information available. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Appreciate
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
the presentation.
Thank you.
Good luck with it.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Pass this. So it's kind of hard to believe that it was just about a year ago that we were here delivering our first results from the community demand model work. as it really just, I think, kind of feels like yesterday, but I have to give some credit to, I think, the fact that Stratus has become part of our everyday conversations, our everyday vernacular as we're talking about data in Chesterfield. So I'm very excited to share with you this afternoon some great updates and initial results that we're seeing from the student forecast work that's happened and recently just been presented internally. So elementary schools, jumping right in, is projecting some moderate growth, overall just shy of 8%. However, that growth is mixed, so we're looking in a little bit deeper. This is, again, very high-level results, but trying to gain some insight as to where that's happening, why that's happening, what we're seeing within the elementary space. Because among those 39 elementary schools, just about a third of them are seeing a slight decline in the student population for that geography that they're located within. Our middle schools are projecting to see the most significant growth over the next 5-year period. And so I think that, intuitively we have felt that, information that we're seeing as it's been presented previously as well through our last run of the model had shown the pressures on capacity within Tomahawk and Falling Creek. Those schools were elevated to a priority at which we're now seeing them come to fruition to address those capacity concerns. But looking more holistically across all middle schools, I'll give you a little bit bigger snapshot in the next slide, but definitely seeing the growth in student population among those school areas. And then just really of significance to note, despite that drop we saw during last school year, we are back on track. So, looking at pre-pandemic, our long-term trend is continuing forward. And so that trajectory is still hitting the mark of what we were anticipating, where we were anticipating to be. Again, this is a snapshot into the results, just a quick kind of set the base. This is not indicative of capacity problems or issues or pressures that we're seeing, but rather just a pure result of the model outputs. And so the darker the red, the higher growth that we're seeing in students who would be living within these areas. So we will take this information, develop some more analysis, evaluate in more detail, and deliver some insight into this data that helps us understand what type of issues or things that we need to be examining further. Then, looking forward, next steps with Stratus, we've engaged with the Microsoft partner Catapult again to develop a model that will support parks and libraries. Our fire folks, we've got great data fire folks on staff who've been working intently with our IST data team who have gotten very close to delivering their model results that we're excited to see. And so that information coming out together will be presented in a refreshed version of the demand indicators report. That report will also include a publication of the approved housing pipeline database. So I think we all are pretty familiar with that information. It's additional data set of information that we look at as we're evaluating needs and programmatic services across the county, but having that insight into new housing development as they are sitting in that pipeline in the 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 5+ year time frame when we could expect those units to drop. So we'll have a automated process that goes along with that, updated monthly, online, published in our report. So come January, February timeframe when we present the proposal CIP, you'll have an update with that report and access to that information in a more real-time format that I think everyone will be very excited about. The public facilities plan update is underway, so we are working in tandem with the planning department to make recommendations in coordination with other departments. I think we've met with just about every department in the public facilities plan as it exists today, and reviewing the standards and the requirements and the information that's included there to help provide that guidance that also gives some flexibility in for us to make decisions on what it is that we need to do to be serving the community for the future, and not having any limitations or things that are going to provide us with some obstacles to achieving those things that we need to get done. And then the last thing, last thing, to leave you all with, but as I am transitioning into a new role and the life of Stratus, the work that's been done here kind of programmatically here on the business side, we've had conversations all along. Budget and management has been a partner in this process, and so they will be, really taking over me working closely with Gerard to help coordinate that strategic oversight with our IST data team. Nancy Tickle, Trip Ray, Art John are all fantastic partners in this. They have provided, great support. We have very talented resources across this organization. Shane Hill and Logan Ashby will be running more day-to-day oversight on the programmatic pieces and how we operate Stratus, and using the data that our data team is harnessing the power in behind, the infrastructure building and making that data accessible across our organization. So, I think that there's been just very exciting work on this front. Our organization has really taken a hold of Stratus, using this information to the maximum ability that we have. We're delivering results to our community in a way that we haven't been able to before. So, all of that is, I think, an exciting time to be moving this program forward. There's a lot of momentum in we all feel that for sure. So just shifting gears, slight, non-Stratus related, but this evening, you're going to take action on the 2022 legislative program. Just a quick reminder on that, on October 27th, there was a work session to review the draft program. We followed up on November 5th at the County and School Liaison meeting, and through those discussions at that time, there was a topic that we came collectively around regarding state funding formula and state staffing formula. And so, collectively recognize the power to go together on these topics and how we can, pursue and advocate for the state taking accountability for those obligations in which they've identified. So, looking forward to working with Sean more closely on those topics as well. And then, once approved, that final package will be presented to our delegation during the December 15th legislative reception. So before I turn it over to Gerard, are there any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, any questions, comments?
School numbers that you brought up earlier, and certainly that's the projections of what we think students could be within the school system. But that doesn't necessarily mean, because I know that we, as an example, recently approved another private school in Chesterfield County, which will probably have 100 students per grade, which could actually take 1,200 students away from our public schools. And I think there's another one, if I remember correctly, there's another private school that may be considering coming to Chesterfield. So when we look at these, do we look at the numbers and what our private schools are actually taken into consideration?
So we've pulled private school data from VDOE. The issue that we're running into, and that there's limitations on the depth of the data that we can get from there, as we don't know where those students are coming from. And so we are, going to continually look at our model and the results and the way that information, it's, the basis of the inputs on the model, student addressing data, housing data, live birth data, for things that we know in Chesterfield, predicting the growth of students within that defined geography. And so, yes, to your point, there certainly could be some students living within those, within Chesterfield, attending those private schools. So we're keeping a pulse on it, but we're trying to figure out the best way to pull in that additional analysis.
And how about the homeschooling numbers?
We have more detail, and we've just been able to access that recently, and so we're going to pull that in for additional analysis.
I mean, I think it's important that we have all that information, because when you look at that, that's a startling number to go from 62 to 67, or almost 68,000. But again, we need to make sure we take into consideration that some of those projections may actually end up being homeschooled or actually in private school.
I will also add, Mr. Carroll, too, one of the things we're trying to embed in is the career technical centers. Those students have a homeschool assignment, but again, these facilities, as we're trying to maximize their use, actually, again, if they house 2,000 students, just as a rough estimate, and we have a total of 20,000 high school students, then 10% at any point in time are not in a home school. So we're trying to work better with the schools of understanding the initial home schools for each of those trade and technical centers, because that takes pressure off the home school when they're not there.
Don't get me wrong, I think this is a great program. I
Well-
just want to make sure that, these other factors are looked at as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I would add too, we've never been able to really dive into the data in this way before. And so we're at the point that we can ask better questions. And so with that ability, it gives us better insight to ask those better questions. So thank you for that.
Okay, other questions? Thank you so very much. Dr. Casey?
I would say the other variable we're paying attention closely to the schools are, there may have been a lot of people who may have homeschooled over the last year or two, or delayed kindergarten entrance for a child, where you've yet to see maybe the full results of what those people may be doing come next September.
Right, so it's part of, what we're gonna look at with that elementary decline, seeing that, nearly a third of those schools aren't at that point where we were necessarily projecting them to be. I think some gut reaction says, sure, I think elementary had some of the harder hit during the pandemic as far as kids entering in or parents making a decision for alternative education. So that's where we're trying to figure out, what does that answer, what does that look like, and how do we get here?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent work. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Dr. Casey. I've got some miscellaneous finance topics for you this afternoon. But before I jump into that, as Natalie mentioned, we're going to transition the Stratus program to budget and management. And I just wanted to take a second to thank her for everything that she's done with that program since the beginning. As you are all well aware, she's been extremely instrumental in that. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with her closely, but just wanted to publicly say thank you and congratulations to her on her new role. So, with that, the first slide that's up is the CIP update. As you know, we're in the midst of building our CIP over the next 5-year horizon, including a bond referendum. Just a quick overview, the department requests totaled just shy of $800 million over the 5-year planning horizon, which is 1.7 times what our current capacity is. So unsurprisingly, over the last few months, we've been meeting with departments to identify the priority projects, given the funding capacity and revenue constraints that we have. Our preliminary review of that is, when we came to you last year for the CIP and bond referendum, we noticed the projects coalesced around 4 key areas. Those are still holding up as we develop CIP this year: police and fire, renovations and replacements, libraries, transportation projects, and parks expansion and development. We are awaiting finalised guidance from the state, as you probably saw in the news yesterday, with their extra revenue capacity they expect in the next few years. There's been some back and forth about revenue sharing. Initially, they said it wouldn't be available until 2027. That could be earlier, but we have that in the back of our heads as we're developing the CIP. Then finally, in this slide is just a quick CIP timeline. We are working right now to finalise the recommendations this month. We'll be meeting with county administration and all of you to discuss the projects that will both be in the CIP and referendum. We'll have a work session in public in February, with community meetings and a public hearing in the CIP in March, with the adoption of the CIP in conjunction with the operating budget in April. So with that, we came to you, as I say, a year ago with the referendum. A lot can change in a year, as we all know. So we went back again to our financial advisors and asked them to do an independent review of our capacity, especially when it relates to debt. That enables us to kind of define the parameters and kind of buffers of what we could afford to do as part of a bond referendum. They primarily look at it through the lens of the 4 policy ratios you see on the right-hand side of the chart. And they really look at the debt capacity and debt affordability. The way I kind of easily describe this is, if you go to buy a house, the bank will tell you can afford up to X amount. Doesn't necessarily mean you want to go to that amount. There's an affordability aspect to all of this so that you don't put pressure on other services that we provide. So the outcome of that review, we're well within our policy ratios. It's one of the foundations of our AAA strength. And even with the new issuance of the VPSA bonds in the next couple of months, the numbers that we came to you last year with about a $450 million referendum are right on track, which is split approximately $300 million for the schools and $150 million for our county projects. So the fun part for me today, as I like to call this. So traditionally, when we get rating agencies, the AAA rating we've had, it's always been through primarily a financial lens. It has an unassigned fund balance policy, and those 4 policy ratios that I mentioned on the last slide. Now they've taken a more holistic view to the rating process, and so this actually covers not just local governments, but the private sector and sovereign debt as well. And it's ESG is the acronym, to throw another one out there. It looks at environmental, social, and governance risks or benefits that could impact the credit rating for the organisation. They have 2 scores, which I'll walk through in a second. They've got an issuer profile score and a credit impact score. But the takeaway from this is that they're companions to the bond rating. They don't replace that AAA bond rating that everyone knows and is well aware of. This is just a guidance as to help them come to that score. So, as I say, they have it for different sectors. For the public sector, they have the environmental. I'm not going to walk through every one of these, but there's physical climate risks. You probably saw that Virginia Beach issued just over $500 million in bonds for climate projects. That's something that they will look at going forward. And thankfully, we are not as exposed to they are on the eastern seaboard with hurricanes. Social demographics, do we have an aging population that may put more demand on our services? Labour and income, is it a strong, growing labour market? Is it one that's declining? Are the income levels in the community rising? Housing, as Mr. Harris touched on, with the affordability aspect of the housing in the community. And then lastly, governance, the budget and management process, to be of strong financial policy, strong leadership within the organisation. So with all of that, the way this works is they look at our traditional financial metrics, but then they look at these in 3 separate isolations: environmental, social, and governance. And then we got the final result late last night, actually. They rank these on a kind of E1 to E5, S1 to S5, G1 to G5, 1 being the best, 5 obviously being the worst. All of those feed in together. The rating agencies, when they meet to determine the rating for the entity, look into this, and then we'll issue what the CIS score, which again ranges from 1 to 5, 1 being the best, 5 being the lowest. And that's just to put potential investors on alert for how those 3 components impacted the credit rating score. So as you can see for us, we got an E2. I looked into this, I read through all the documentation, 57 plus pages of it. It's very rare, if not impossible, for an organization to get an E1 score. So E2 on that front is the best that we can do. S1 and G1, we both rated strong positive impacts, demographic, educational, and in our management and budgeting processes. Putting all that together into the mix, final product, we had a CIS1, the highest possible score that we could get. So it just complements our AAA rating and just supports that, the county can be resilient and has the capacity to respond to any adverse impacts. So any questions on that? This is a new topic, as I say.
Yes, it is new. Great. Do we have any idea of other institutions, organizations relative to this, and what's the comparative benchmarks that we're looking at throughout the area or the country, Dr. Casey?
We don't have those yet because they'll literally, as I say, ours just came out last night. So
Okay,
we had a preliminary rating, but our finalized one just came out last night. So I can go back and certainly look at that and give you an update.
I think we are one of the first in Virginia to go through this process, and I think we all know from reading the literature there are going to be AAA localities who do not get a 1 score. In fairness, there may be other localities that have a lower bond rating that may be excelling in some of these other figures. So, but this is more than just a rating, and we're going to understand more of it, but this helps our business community understand what it takes to work here, invest here, expand here, or for Gerard to help with prospects that differentiate us, because this is a national standard. So again, this is not a marketing issue where we may have nicer marketing materials. This is a national benchmark that, again, the private sector is paying close attention to. And again, it's the health of and wealth of the people. And again, it starts with the Board of Supervisors, and it starts with the citizens.
Thank you. Excellent.
And then finally, is just some tax relief updates for public hearings that are before you tonight. The first one is adjustments to the tax relief for the elderly and disabled brackets. February last year, the board amended the 100% bracket to accommodate prior year Social Security adjustments. That was the first amendment to the program we'd had since 2013. Recognizing the inflationary pressures that we've talked about before, especially for program participants, and with the recent announcement of a 5.9% cost of living adjustment from the Social Security Administration, we are proposing to adjust all the brackets in the program by 6%. The other public hearings that are before you tonight are to increase the Personal Property Tax Relief Act threshold from $1,000 to $1,500. That is the first amendment to this program since 1998. It will lift another just over 14,000 taxpayers out of paying vehicle property taxes, and the average relief on that is about $20 per vehicle. And then finally, to increase the BPO threshold from 300,000 to 400,000. Once this is adopted, that would mean that 2/3 of Chesterfield businesses would no longer pay this tax. So those are the public hearings that are before you this evening.
Thank you. Excellent. Any questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.